Hello and welcome to Manibil. This will be part 9 of my deconstruction of Consciousness Squared's series on idealism, and I guess more particularly analytic idealism in the vein of Bernardo Kastrup, basically a fanboy series on Bernardo Kastrup's talking points on analytic idealism, or at least it shines very strongly through. This is part 9 of his, called What Went Wrong with Knowledge Only in the West. Of course, the East is always, we can't challenge the mystics of the East, right? It's only us. It's here that there's something wrong. Okay, let's see. Let's jump in. Oh yeah. By the way, I need to mention the subtext here. It says, let me just expand it completely if I can. In recent centuries, the West has attempted to change the base. The West, what is that? How can the West, it's an idea, it's a label, cannot change a basis of anything, can it? Can it, right? So it's again this, it's just a sign, it's an indication of somebody living in abstractions, right? The West hasn't attempted to change anything. The West is an idea. It's a label on a map in an atlas, right? How we can know things, and while successful in part, this materialist diversion is hiding the true nature of existence, bringing our epistemology back in line with the idealism that has been known in the East for millennia, will allow us to examine the true nature of reality. It's like it's just the same old new age bullshit kind of whatever, right? I mean, it's like, it's just change it a little bit and everything is in place, right? We don't need to have rigid philosophy, just need to tweak this little knob a little, right? And many thanks to Bernardo Kastrup for the inspiring argument. It's not just an argument, it's an inspiring argument, right? Thank you for the guru, right? The Western guru. All right, let's kick in.
Centuries ago, the West made a wrong turn concerning how we can know what we know. In this video, we will describe...
It would be, before I head in, it would be fantastic if he would start with some definitions, right? Or just some definitions somewhere, right? What I mean by knowledge is this, something like that, right? Can you go wrong with knowledge? How would you know? Would you need the old, paradox of knowledge, which is sort of I think it's in the Meno's paradox, right? The old, it's a book by. It's a dialogue by Plato, right? Meno's paradox. Let us have it, right? It's a Socratic dialogue. Let me see if I can find it here. Meno's paradox. Where should I go? Maybe this one. Scholar blocks. No, not that one. Sorry for that. I might have, I haven't listened through the video yet, so otherwise I would have prepared myself a bit, right? Meno, maybe we should take this one. Wikipedia, usually a good place to start. Meno's paradox, yeah. Meno asks Socrates. Hopefully you can see it all. Meno asks Socrates, and how will you inquire, Socrates, into that which you do not know? What will you put forth as the subject of inquiry? And if you find what you want, how will you ever know that this is the thing which you did not know, right? How will you get from knowing if you don't know? If you know it, you don't need to inquire, right? Because it's knowledge. And if you don't know it, what criteria will be for judging whether it's knowledge? And how would you step from not knowing to knowing? If you don't know it, how would you identify knowledge if you're not knowing it? Right? Sort of. Okay, Socrates rephrases the question, which has come to be the canonical statement of the paradox. A man cannot inquire either about that which he knows or about that which he does not know. For if he knows, he has no need to inquire. And if not, he cannot, for he does not know the very subject about which he is to inquire. So this is an 1871 translation by Benjamin Jowett. So it's probably somewhat sophist approach to knowledge, because either you're standing before knowledge and don't know how you got to it, or you're standing after knowledge and you don't need to inquire in it, because it's this dividing line between stepping from not knowing to knowing. What's the criteria, right? If you're on one side, how would you get to the other side? Because you don't know it. How will you get to it, right? What's the magic, threshold for, now I know, right? And if you already know it, you don't need to inquire into whether you know it or not, because you know it, right? So there might be some fallacy somewhere buried into this paradox, right? It's not the only paradox that I think is presented in the Platonic dialogues, but it might point to something that you need to check up on before you claim knowledge, right? Because maybe the idea of some kind of transcendental access to knowledge, I know this because I know it, right? That's not an argument, right? So you don't know, so how would you get to knowledge? Well, wouldn't you need to have knowledge in order to get to knowledge, something like that, right? Or an infinite regress of knowledge. I need to know what it is I know, and I need to know how I know that, and I need to know how I know that, and so on and so on and so on, right? So it seems like there are problems built into the idea of knowledge. And I don't think we will go into anything like that, like this, right? But we might. Let's see. Or let's hear.
Describe this wrong turn and the likely reason for it. As we've described previously, the only thing that we can know for...
It's a wrong turn. Yes, we already know what is right. So if you're not complying somewhere down the line, there was a wrong turn. You're presupposing you understand what it means to be wrong, right? Usually wrong is used in ethics, right? So there's also a bit of an appeal to ethics just by using the terms, right? It's all sophistry, this. It's a wrong turn. It's sort of, okay, so you got to bad philosophy. But he does it just by using the term wrong, right? It illuminates, to me at least, right, the power of language, right? And what sophists do is using language to their favor, right? They are not being careful that you are on board and not being screwed around with using this language. No, they use all the bells and whistles in order to... It's like the Pied Piper, right? Sophists are the Pied Pipers of philosophy, or of the one-eyed kings of the blind, or whatever you want. Right? They use language to lure you into an understanding purely by using the skills of language, right?
Firsthand is our experience, our thoughts, feelings, and perceptions that occur in our minds. And this is knowable to us only through consciousness.
Okay, so now he says occurs in our minds, right? But the foundations of analytic idealism is that everything is made of mind. It's made of mind stuff, right? But it's this switch, beware of this switching between, it's a category. It's what would it be? Just like there are four-legged animals, right? Then that's a category. an animal is not a four-legged animal. It may have four legs, but it's not a four-legged animal, right? Four-legged animal is a category. And it's sometimes hard to distinguish between when you're referring to a cognition or anything like that, or a category. Well, if something is a category, it's artificial, it's synthetic, it is created. It makes sense to use it in order to communicate, but it's purely a communicative tool. So saying mind is just saying everything that is going on there, right? That doesn't mean that everything is all of a sudden made of that category you invented, right? And they're springing back and forth between using it as a category to describe things that are within it and saying it's made of that category, right? That is the trick these idealists are using, and it's bullshit, right? It's a category error.
From this, we humans have obviously examined our experiences in many ways, and we have derived information. We have viewed, weighed, and analyzed.
Okay, so you have derived information. What does it mean that something is the information? If I'm experiencing green over there, is that information? Why is it not enough to say I experience green? Why do you need to classify it and clarify it and qualify it? And what is the threshold for doing that? Because if everything I experience is an information, you're just changing the term from experience to information, right? What's the difference? If there is no difference, why are you changing the word? And if there is a difference, why are you not qualifying the difference, right?
Including measures of weight, angle, size, distance, frequency, spin, amplitude, hertz, and on and on.
These are not informations. You might classify it as information, but these are quantifications of comparisons between various cognitions within your experience, right? If you have a beaver and compare it to an elephant, you can say the elephant is 6 beavers tall, right? Maybe something 8, 10 beavers tall. That doesn't mean that something arrives as an information. It's whether or not you think it's information, right? You could say it's maybe data, right? But data you don't care about isn't really information, right? If I tell you my loudspeaker is 5 Blu-rays tall, is that information to you? My loudspeakers over there are 5 or maybe 7 Blu-rays tall. Is that information? Depends on if you need it or not, right? So it's all these, it's just, it sounds like we are very, very knowledgeable, very wise, using terms and, just throwing around words and hope it sticks to you, right? And you're lured into it. It's not coherent, it's not rigid, it's not based on any foundation of any kind. And if it is just alluded to and it's sufficient if they can convince you they're using some kind of basis here, but they're not.
We do this in order to better understand experience, knowing, and sometimes forgetting that this is all information that is derived from experience. From these measurements, we have then formed models that are mental constructs of how we believe the world to be, including mathematical models.
No, that's a straw man. Yes, there might be some scientists and physicalists or whatever who thinks that by quantifying their experience, they are actually describing that experience. They are getting to some kind of description of what it is. No. They're just describing scientifically their experiences, right? And I come up with particular ways of describing in certain categories called chemistry and biology, depending on the kinds of objects they're describing or kinds of aspects of these objects they're describing, right? If you're doing chemistry, it's a particular kind of, endeavors or particular kind of events we're dealing with, right? Rather than, mathematics or Maybe mathematics is pure abstraction. You don't need empiricism in order to do mathematics. You are using the abstracts of numbers and distances and spaces and whatever, geometry and so on. But they are mathematics then an abstract tool used to quantify, right? And describe. So it's a straw man to claim that science is doing that or materialism is doing that. And this straw man they're going to use to say we have a better description, right?
None of which exist in reality, but only in our minds, as approximations that we continually refine with changing information. But around 1600 in the West, with the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, a distinction was drawn between our qualitative experiences and quantitative information. Western science was born and a curious thing happened.
Yeah, but they are still using, you are describing your empirical, your sense-based empiricism and how it moves about and try to predict what is going on based on prior experiences of these cognitions of a, let's call it an external world, right? For a lack of a better word. I don't necessarily like to put it that way because you're basically describing your experiences and working from the idea that is based on an external world. But it's not, science is not describing your desires and your emotions and your feelings and your stomachache and things like that, because it's not arriving from the outside, right? It's based on what is colors and sounds and taste and smells and so on, right? And mostly colors, I would say, right? Or the space on which colors are placed, right? So,
happened that with the increased focus on the physical, people paid less attention to the qualitative experiences that gave rise to the quantitative information. This was the beginning of the attitude that if you couldn't measure it, then it didn't exist. Eventually, many people considered this physical information to be base reality, and that everything else needed to be described in terms of the physical, including our subjective, qualitative experiences. But here they have understandably run into problems. For instance, an experience of a smell can be described to a limited extent with quantitative information. But what cannot be done from this information is to recall the memory that the smell of that particular flower evoked in your mind. The experience of the smell cannot be recreated. Our qualitative experiences can be described only to a limited extent in quantitative terms.
No, but it's this, you need the qualities in order to get to the cognitions, right? You need the smell of strawberry, so to say, right? In order to cognize a strawberry, potentially at least, right? You need the color of strawberry and the shape of strawberry in order to cognize strawberry. And then you say you cannot get the smell of whatever from the cognition. No, because you needed that to get to the cognition. And it's the cognitions you're describing using science. But that doesn't mean you're all of a sudden describing the smell of strawberries using science. No, because that's not what science is doing when you're doing science. You're describing the cognitions. But you needed the qualia to get to the cognition, right? That's why it's called empirical, right? You're using those qualia to get to those cognitions that you then use science to describe, right?
And you cannot reverse engineer from the quantitative back to our qualitative experiences. This would be to derive more from less. One can experience a set of colors and then describe them in analytical terms, but you cannot then reproduce the experience that those colors had on your emotions. That is more from less. It is easy to comprehend how the experience of listening to music can have detailed sound waves.
No. You're not listening to music. You're listening to sounds that you call music because of the way these sounds are, selected and put together. You're listening to sounds. You are in abstracting the idea of music from those sounds. You're not listening to music, right? That's again these categories are all of a sudden, being placed in the outside world, right? He's still suffering from the materialist fallacy. It's just only used sparingly where he needs it.
But what cannot be done is to reconstruct the qualitative experience of a moving piece. That's more from less. Our tactile sense is something that appears to us as in part physical, but the emotion that someone's touch can create is beyond reach. More from less. This translation from experience to physical representation back to experience fails for experiences of all of our senses. And our conscious inner life appears to us as
This, I'm not completely, cocksure, but it sounds like a straw man he's trying to create, right? He's trying to twist it around a bit, the understanding of what scientists are doing, and they're claiming they're doing something that they're actually not claiming. Though there might be some scientists who pretend or attempt to claim it, and then they're pulling that straw man down, right? If they claim more they can claim, they say, no, that's what science does. And then they're pulling down that impossible claim, right? So it's all about framing the opposition as dysfunctional, so that you will go and say, okay, I guess I'll have to listen to idealism, and creating a dichotomy that says, well, there's no other possibilities of how to understand the world, right? Then either materialism or idealism. That's the trick, right? And then by saying, well, they're stupid over there on the other side, so there's only my side, so you have to come over here, right?
as the brain and its function, but it remains true that you cannot reproduce conscious inner life from the physical. If in doubt, please see our video Matter versus Mind for evidence against this view, and watch the video How the World Works for an alternate perspective. Our egoic self has a collection of memories as experiences, and yet there is no known physical representation for this in the brain. So there is again no way to produce
but the brain is a representation. You can't. It's again this screwing around with these understanding. At one point you understand you can't get to an outside. All of a sudden, if the outside is ripples, and all of a sudden you're talking about the brain as an outside that, in a materialist fashion, it's all fucked up in this you can't have it both ways. You can only, if you have to say, oh, I'm working from this principle or this understanding, you can't go and violate it later, right? If you're talking about a brain, you're talking about an experience, or at most a representation of something else you don't have access to, right? And if you say it's ripples, okay, fine, but I don't care about these ripples, right? You also don't care about ripples, right? You don't talk about it as ripples, you talk about it as brain. But there's a representation. That's not the actual thing. So if your representations work in a certain fashion and move it about in a certain fashion, you're doing science. Right? You're saying my experiences, my cognitions of brains and whatever is going on in this cortex or whatever is doing this. You're doing science. And that's what you want to say it doesn't work. Or how can you be so ignorant of what you're saying here, man, right? It's just wrapped up in all these terms. And that's why I don't like this kind of presentation. Because it skates over good and rigid philosophy. It just throws terms and shit at you and hope it sticks, right?
Memories from the physical, or more from less. And of course, consciousness, awareness itself, which is the act of knowing anything, is not only not represented in our physical substrate.
The act of knowing anything. Awareness is the act of knowing anything. I mean, that's a kind of convoluted, sophist way of saying it, right? If awareness is the only way you can know, then awareness is the tool to knowledge, right? So there must be some definition of knowledge you have that encompasses awareness somehow, right? Would you mind giving me this definition so I know, have just some idea what we're dealing with here, right?
But ironically is that which materialists claim to have without any understanding of its origin or even why it should exist at all. For if we are only physical, then physical laws dictate all behavior, and awareness of behavior is an unnecessary addition. This is the hard problem of consciousness, which is a problem only because of this metaphysical break, and disappears by viewing experience as primary. It is unsolvable to materialists, just as we cannot recreate any other experience of the mind from the physical, because it is to demand more from less. So why did this disconnect happen? No matter how scientific or enlightened a person is, they are also bound by human nature. When this qualitative-quantitative rift began, the church was an incredibly powerful entity in the West, and the church had firm control over anything remotely related to the person or quote-unquote soul.
Oh, is that a good thing, or is that would that be nice to get away from that? There's some people calling the church has basically mind control over people. Wouldn't it be a good idea to get away from that, right? Let people think for themselves, right? Wouldn't that be, nice?
Those without power had to act in non-threatening ways toward the church, and so they carved out some territory in the form of...
Non-threatening, yeah, you might mention that they would fucking burn them alive or something like that. If they try to do anything that could, wrestle the power away from them, right? By waking people up that they're being fucking mind controlled, right?
Matter that the church did not consider a threat. So this disconnect, likely created by a power imbalance of history, then developed into an epistemological and metaphysical shift that remains to this day, at least in the Western world.
You are saying that, yes, but they were aware of that there was aspect of the mind that did not have to do with falling beavers, right? Like your emotions and desires and whatever. Of course they were aware of that. But they say, okay, that's what the church is, right? Let us concentrate on figuring out how long time it takes for a beaver to fall from the Eiffel Tower. And if the church was looking at that, okay, I guess, well, you won't. And it might turn into they will be more productive and we can get higher tithes and so on, right? So let them have some free market and then they will have more money that we can steal from them, right?
Even regarding naturalistic explanations of existence like idealism, described here. Recognizing the problem is the first step toward correcting it, but the issue is that many people don't yet see the problem. It is as if they live in a rich three-dimensional world and have created a map in order to document that world, only to turn around and claim that the map is the world while ignoring the richness around them. You can't regain the richness of the territory.
Oh yeah, they're so focused on this map. Yes, they're trying to pull the territory over this map, and they don't see the love and the light and the singularity of mind. Yes, they're so stupid, right? Oh man, this is also a straw man, right?
From the map, just as you can't regain the richness of felt experience from quantitative numbers and models. To move forward, we need to return to the recognition that the only fundamental knowns of our existence are our mental experiences, even though they are difficult and in many...
Oh, okay, so you're not defining what you mean by know, right? It's just because know and knowing is such a, it's a strong term to use, right? It's like you're having insight, you have an understandings and so on, but you are very carefully avoiding any kind of definition, right? But knowing can only be a part of your experience, right? So if knowing is the powerful thing, then you can't know what is beyond your experience then. So then why the fuck would I care about whatever ripples you can abstract your way to beyond my experiences, right? Because you cannot possibly know them according to your own standards here, right? Which is apparently also Bernardo Kastrup's standards. So if knowing is within my experiences, then it cannot be known that there are ripples outside my experiences, right? Then why the fuck would I spend any of my precious time on that, right?
Many cases impossible to measure. Then we can move forward from that reasonable beginning.
Move forward.
With
Move
that,
where?
please.
Where? Move forward. What is that? Oh yes, these materialists are keeping us down. We want to get to fairy tale land, but they're stuck in their maps, their materialistic grey maps, and we want to the colorful, warm, and cozy and fluffy feeling of, rainbows and soft eyes. Right? Oh.
Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for Consciousness Squared.
Oh. Oh, man. Holy shit, man. This is the end of this thing so far, right? What went wrong? Oh, only in the West. We are not the gurus.
Centuries ago,
the
West made a
the
wrong
Indian gurus will not be mentioned here. We will not mention the gurus in India. No. Okay, please share, like, and subscribe, and give me a comment. What do you think about this series? It sucks, right? It's decently well put together, you could say, right? Decently, but annoying music and graphics that moves all over the place, and the one eye looking at you, peekaboo, right? And man, it's the same shit, right? And there's some foundational stuff that is never dealt with, right? It's about convincing you that, you have been trained to be a materialist, but you should come over us because they have these 10 problems and we have solved them just by saying ripples, right? So, but the foundation is, how do you argue for an external world, right? How do you argue for an external world? All is just experience, right? From the get-go. If you add something to it, it's something you add to that experience. For instance, an external world, right? So if that external world is there in your philosophy, how did you get to it? Did you just say, well, it's just there, right? Did you say, well, I can argue from this experience, I can argue that there must be an external world, right? But what would that be, right? What experience would that be? Because experiences are foundationally the qualia, right? And this depends a bit on your ontology, and that's why it's important that you do some ontology, in my opinion, right? But in my ontology, the ground floor or the reduction base is the qualia, right? It's the sounds, the taste, the colors, and so on, right? So what sound, what taste, what smell? You have a smell. Oh, that smell, that means there is an outside world, right? Or that smell and that color and that sound, therefore there is something beyond my experiences, right? I can't see anything following from that, right? So what's the argument then? There is no argument. They don't present Bernardo Kastrup doesn't extend an argument. They basically take for granted that the materialist notion that you are having a direct access to an external world also goes within in idealism. Why? You just retracted from it by saying, no, you can't have a direct access to an external world, on which I do agree. But then it disappears. If you want it, you need to argue for it now, right? You can't just get to keep it, right? No argument. And idealism basically stops there. If you cannot give me a fucking rigid argument, then I'm not buying any of it, right? It doesn't matter what harebrained shit you can come up with being a part of that external world if you cannot argue rigidly for it, right? Okay, so that's the end of this series so far. So if more of, I better actually sub the channel to make sure I see if another one comes up, right? And I don't want to like this. I don't particularly like it, right? Yeah, that's it. There you have it. As I said, please share, like, subscribe, give me a comment. Let me have, if you want to support me, donations are possible. Links below, or also links to cryptos on the board. Also links below. And beyond that, Have a nice day. See you in the next one.